Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dan Hanford, and my wife, Danae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Want daily interviews with real estate investors and none of the fluff? Go to bestevershow.com, where Joe Fairless interviews real estate investors and entrepreneurs daily about their best advice ever. Go to bestevershow.com.
Today, we welcome Tony Loyd. Tony is a speaker. He's the author of Crazy Good Advice, 10 Lessons Learned from 150 Leading Social Entrepreneurs. He is a former Fortune 500 executive with extensive experience in strategic planning, talent management, and leadership development. He also hosts the podcast Social Entrepreneur, where you can hear the stories of change makers who are making an impact on the world. So, Tony, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us today. We're looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for making me part of your marathon interview day. I know you two are having a busy day.
Want to see if you can get us started by just talking to us a little bit about your experience in the corporate world and how you got to the point of writing this book and hosting this podcast about entrepreneurship.
So I was actually an independent consultant for a lot of years. I had my own consulting company, and it started off in a very technical consulting. And then I moved into more, training people and then how to run training departments, et cetera. And in 1998, I was recruited. I was doing consulting work with John Deere, and they recruited me in. And so I had this corporate career that sort of was fast track. One of the things that was sort of key about my corporate career was I often acted as an intrapreneur. So, an entrepreneur within an organization. So, for example, I started up John Deere University as a standalone business within the business. And so that was kind of I kept my entrepreneurial chops intact while doing all that. And then in March of 2014, I kind of came to a personal life decision, and we can kind of explore that a little bit. And but I made this decision to leave my corporate job and to go do something else. So I launched my company, and the name of the company is Culture Shift Companies. Now, nobody's going to know that company name because I don't lead with that brand. And like you said, our flagship product is the Social Entrepreneur podcast. And then last year, I wrote a book, and it was based on what I had learned from interviewing several hundred leading social entrepreneurs. Then that kind of led to my speaking engagement. So today, I guess I live what Jeff Goins describes as a portfolio life. So I've stringed together all these different things. So there's the podcast, there's the book, there's speaking, there's also consulting and coaching and other things that I do. So it's not one thing, but it's sort of a string full of interests that keep me interested in doing things.
So talk to us a little bit about what I like to call a sore thumb tough decision, if you will, where, you kind of think of a tough decision that you had made over your career as an entrepreneur or maybe even getting into the entrepreneurial career. And, that tough decision that you made, and it was a tough decision, and it really didn't turn out the way you really wanted it to.
Well, okay, so that last qualification, I didn't see that one coming. I could name about 10,000 decisions that I made that were bad, probably. One of the things I did last year was I launched a radio program, and it was, I kind of made a big deal out of it and told lots of people I was going to do it. And then I launched the radio program, and in the end, there was no financial return on it. I really wasn't making anything off of it. And it caused me to have to edit my podcast down to exactly 24 minutes on the dot and all that kind of stuff. And so having 1 year ago launched this radio program, I just this week made the decision. And a month ago, I informed them, and just this week was my last episode on the radio. So only 1 year on the radio. That was one of those things where it was an interesting experiment. I really thought it was going to lead to maybe some syndication or some, advertising revenue and sponsorship and all that. And it really did not pan out at all. So I felt like I was putting a lot of effort in, but I really wasn't seeing the return on that. I could probably tell you some other decisions that I made that were worse, but that's the one that popped to mind because it's recent for me.
So in that tough decision of having to cancel that radio show, that was obviously a local radio station that you had worked that out with, correct?
Yes.
And was that one that they hired you to do, or you volunteered to do, or is that a paid radio show?
Well, I don't pay them for it. The idea was that they would help me find sponsors, and then I would take a percentage of the revenue from the sponsors. So I gave them the content for free. The business model was that whoever advertised in my hour slot would, I'd get a percentage of the revenue. If they sold it, it was like 20%. If I sold it, it was 50%. And I finally figured out that they weren't going to sell anything. And if they weren't going to sell any advertisement, well, I can go get sponsors for my podcast and keep 100% of the revenue. So it just didn't make business sense in the end.
What kind of radio show was it?
It was basically my podcast. So what I do is we tell stories, positive stories from underrepresented voices focused on solutions. So it's a very positive, solution-oriented kind of program.
And, when you went to them and told them that you were going to stop, did they kind of understand and realize that the relationship really wasn't working out?
Yeah, I think 6 months in, I actually approached them and said, I'm not really sure what's going on here. I've been giving you content for free for a year and this isn't working. But then they pushed back and went, oh, no, we have some advertisers that are in the wings. We've been working on them. They're coming. And then nothing happened. Now, here's the honest truth, though. I mean, there were ads that were played during my program. And so somebody somewhere was making revenue off this. And for me, it didn't make sense.
And so when you look at that tough decision that you made with that radio show, what would you say, looking back, was a lesson or a few lessons that you learned that would help you in the future not make that same mistake in a similar decision?
Wow. Well, I think probably trusting my instinct and pulling the trigger sooner would be a lesson learned. I knew 3 months into it that they weren't putting great effort into it. I knew 6 months into it that I wasn't getting out of it what I thought I was going to get out of it. And then, I finally waited until I'd been out there for a year to pull the trigger. I should have just done what I knew to do sooner.
And is there anything you learned maybe before you started that radio show that you should have maybe seen on the horizon before you even said yes to do the show?
I think for me, the question is, what is my contribution, right? So for us, when we're doing these entrepreneurial activities, part of it is about generating revenue, but obviously it has to be sustainable and you have to be able to pull in, revenue to make a livelihood. But the other question is, what's my contribution? And I think going back to where I started, I knew that I wanted to make this contribution to the world. I wanted to use the light I had been given to shine it, on others whose voice isn't being represented in the media often. And so I knew that was something I wanted to do. And if I went to do it all over again, I'd do the same thing. The only question is, would I go on the radio and do it the same way? The podcast is within my control. It's something that I can do. And I hope that answered your question.
I think I understand what you're saying. It was at least worth the effort because you knew it was something that you could make a contribution, and if it worked for everybody, then it would be a good thing.
Yeah.
I want to go back and just have you talk a little bit about the decision that you made. I think you said it was 2014 to leave your corporate position and kind of go out and on your own, because you had been an intrapreneur, as you said, but it had been a while since you had, been the entrepreneur. So can you talk a little bit about that decision and what kind of went into that and, obviously the results that you've seen from that?
Yeah. So, I like this question, honestly, better than the last question, because the last question was kind of like, the sore thumb decision. This is moving towards instead of moving away from, But, within my corporate life, as I said, kind of went up through the ranks. I was executive level with some Fortune 500 companies. But then, the three questions that were on my mind were, when is enough enough? right? At what point do you have enough toys? At what point do you have enough savings? At what point do you say, I am financially independent and I could make different choices? So when is enough enough? The second question is, again, what's my contribution? So if I continue to work at this corporation, am I creating the kind of contribution I want to leave behind, my legacy, the thing I want to contribute to the world? And then the third question is, what have I done with the light I've been given? Now, let's face it, I'm coming up on my 60th birthday. I am a white male. And so as a older white male, I have been given all the light in the universe. Like, I've been winning my entire life. I hit the zip code lottery. And so that's great that I have received all this benefit, but how do I take that light then and shine it on others who are more underrepresented so that their voices can be heard? And so those were the kinds of things that I was thinking about. There's a whole movement called FIRE, FIRE. It's Financial Independence Retire Early. And there are a lot of people who are doing this at age 30 or in their late 20s, where they say, you know what, I have enough. And if I don't take out more than, let's say, 4% per year of my nest egg, I can do this for a really long time. And so, it just becomes this decision about what kind of lifestyle do you want to live? What does it take to sustain that? And at what point is enough enough? And I had hit that point in my life where I said, I want to make a contribution. I think I have enough. Let's just do this.
So you actually now are basically drawing off of a nest egg that you had created while you were working as the intrapreneur for somebody else to be able to pursue the interests that you want to do right now, but also are creating or have this business that where you're making some money and doing some revenue on that as well.
That is correct. Yeah.
And are you actually taking that money in your nest egg, and I would assume you're probably investing that in other types of investments to allow that to be able to continue to reap more benefit from you as well, so you can continue to bring an income from that in addition to the business, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we try to maximize our return, but we don't do a lot of nothing fancy, no Bitcoin, no anything. I mean, we're kind of more the index investor types.
Okay. And there's some people that are listening right now that are thinking, okay, Tony, you made this decision. You're now out. You're drawing off of this nest egg. How much do I need in order to create this type of life that I want to be able to have this enough of a nest egg to draw off of to be able to do that kind of stuff in my life?
Yeah. So it depends on what kind of lifestyle you want to live. I'll give you some examples a little later when you ask me about some resources, maybe about other people whose blogs you could read who are doing this. But if you think about the 4% rule, if you have, let's say, $1 million nest egg, you could draw $40,000 a year off of that and live for a very, very, very long time on that. So, if you make that 2 million, if you make that 3 million, you just multiply by 2, 3. So, 80,000, 120,000, et cetera. And so the question is, how much do you really need to live? And do you have to own your own home? Can you live in a lower cost geographic area? A lot of these people, they go to Thailand for a year, and then they go to a Western European country for a year, and then they go to a low cost Eastern European country, and then, they go to the US, and then they go to Latin America. And so they're able to extend that money over a longer period of time by going to low cost of living areas and living really well.
That's interesting because, I think a lot of people, when they're listening to this, they're thinking, well, it's going to take me a very long time to get to $1 million in the bank, Mm-hmm. But if you have that money set aside, you got to be able to kind of figure out, like you said, work yourself backwards as to what you think you need to have and what you could live off of, and work backwards to figure out how much you would need to have in the bank. Because if you have $1 million in the bank, I mean, you can put it into an investment, and over a 10-year period of time, the average could be around a 10% return on that. So you're going to be making, let's just say on the low end, 5%, 5 to 10%, $50,000 to $100,000 a year off of that investment at the same time. So It can be perpetually creating more money for you, but at the same time, you can be pulling off and living off of it as well.
Yeah. I think we might all be surprised by, if people are contributing to their 401ks and getting the maximum match, or contributing beyond the match, you'd be shocked how many people who are the millionaire next door.
That's true. That's very true. So talk to us a little bit about what you like to do when you face a tough decision. Like you have this tough decision coming up, you've been through tens of thousands of these tough decisions before. What are some of your key things that you like to do when it's a tough decision that's maybe, a very prime or very, very important tough decision?
Yeah, I think one key thing for me was I had to change my decision-making skills. Because as a corporate executive, you are rewarded for making quick, tough decisions. And so if the market is moving in a particular direction, you have to be willing to say, I am abandoning this strategy. I am getting rid of this division. I am doing this thing in order to go where the market is heading, because we want to be first to market in that particular area. So you're rewarded for quick, hard, fast decisions. In my life, what I have found is I had to adapt my wife's decision style, because she does what we call keeping the tabs open. And so, if you think about on your browser, you open up the tab, well, there's another tab. Pretty soon, your mental capacity, if you have all these tabs open in your brain, it's kind of hard to maintain that. Well, she has the discipline to hold an idea in her mind long enough to get lots and lots of input and really think through the quality of the decision, and to be able to, when we make a decision together, then that decision is a higher quality decision than the way I would have done it. And so I've really had to move more towards the way that she makes decisions, which is more input, talk to more people, get more advice, do more research, run the numbers, all that before making a decision. So for me, I have to force myself to keep the tab open for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I love that analogy, actually, because
I'm the one that always goes in and makes really fast decisions.
I was trying to figure out how to say that. I tend to be the one that wants to ruminate and think over things a little bit more. I think you also have to find a balance, because when there's a time to act, you have to act.
Yes.
And it has to be done sometimes right away. And
right.
Sometimes I would probably tend to overthink things. But yes, I love that analogy. What is a book or a resource that you would recommend to our listeners? Maybe either something specifically related to decisions, or maybe just something that has helped you with your mindset or your discipline that you've developed in your career.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll share 4 blogs that I think are really, really interesting. And they all have to do with this idea about FIRE, F-I-R-E, financial independence, retire early. And I can email you these if you want to make it easier for you. But the one is ournextlife.com, young couple in their 30s who, and we need a new word besides retirement. I mean, we're not really retired. We're just living differently. But ournextlife.com, earlyretirementnow.com, gocurrycracker.com. Very interesting couple. They're traveling the world with their small child and living off of very little money and making all that work. And then the last one, if you're more of the numbers geek and you want to get more into, how do you calculate all this stuff, MrMoneyMustache.com. Now that's an interesting name by itself, but those would be the 4: ournextlife.com, earlyretirementnow.com, gocurrycracker.com, and then MrMoneyMustache.com.
Those are great. And I want to shift gears a little bit here, because I want to talk about some things that you've done so far with the money that you've made up to this point in your career and in your life. What is one of the most exciting places you've traveled or item that you've purchased that you've done with the money you've made so far?
Yeah, well, from last September to November, my wife and I took a sabbatical and we traveled to Europe. And we spent 60 days just, living 2-3 weeks at a time. So we were in Portugal. We went to Lisbon and Porto in Portugal. We went to Spain. So we were in Barcelona the day that they declared independence from Spain, which was an interesting time to be there. We also visited San Sebastian and Bilbao and Madrid. And then we popped up to London for a week because we have some friends in London. And then we went to Paris for the last 3 weeks. My wife speaks French and we enjoy Paris a great deal. So, we took 60 days and we just did nothing but unplug. And it was a pretty amazing experience.
That's pretty exciting. That sounds like a lot of fun. And I know one of the things that Danae and I just recently talked about, we were in Chicago this past weekend because we were celebrating our 10-year anniversary together.
Congratulations.
And yes, thank you. And one of the things that came up was, what are we going to do when the kids leave the house? Or what are we going to do? What do we want to do? Because I told her, I'm like, I don't know if I want to just have a house, an empty house that we're going to have. And I want to be able to do certain things and visit different places. And, we kind of thought about, well, I wonder if we could just go live 6 months or a year in various parts of the world and never really have a house, just kind of, rent a fully furnished apartment for a year or whatever, and then kind of travel and explore that particular area of the world.
I'm telling you, read those blogs that I just recommended, because that's what people are doing.
And they're doing it now. They're not waiting until the kids get older. They're taking their kids with them.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So what's one item right now that's on your bucket list?
So I maintain a list of 25 items on my bucket list. And when I check one off, then I put something else on it. So I have a lot of travel things on there. But right now I'm training for a marathon, and then my 60th birthday is coming up in November. So my wife and I are going to pick something off that bucket list and go do. I think for me, the next thing I'd love to do is, go to Costa Rica and do the whole zip line through the canopy thing. I have not done that, and I'd love to do that.
That sounds awesome. I actually did a zip line through some villages in Dominican Republic last year. And that was a lot of fun. So you definitely got to go do that in Costa Rica.
That sounds good.
Well, Tony, tell us a little bit how our listeners can reach out to you if they want to start to follow you or get some more information from you.
Yeah, I spell my last name a little bit differently. So it's Loyd. It's Loyd with one L. So if they find TonyLoyd.com or Tony Loyd on Facebook, etc., they can find me that way.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedule with us to be on the podcast. Thank you so much for the lessons that we can learn from these different tough decisions that you made. And, we hope you have a good rest of your day.
All right. Thanks so much. Enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. You too. Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email, where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.